Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth annual FinCloud Security Summit by the Cloud Security Alliance. My name is Troy Leach. I am the Chief Strategy Officer here at CSA, and it's my privilege to welcome you to a day of some incredible topics. We're going to be covering many different technologies from quantum to agentic AI and the control plane for payments to cloud computing best practices and deployment in large infrastructure. It's going to be a day of a lot of learning. I hope you enjoy the lineup that we've created for you today. And before I turn it over to all of our distinguished speakers, I did want to take a moment and share with you some very recent findings that we have from a survey that just concluded this month for CSA. It will be part of a report that we will publish in Q2 of this year, and that is around the state of AI and cloud in financial services specifically. And now this is the third time that we have produced this type of report over 9 years. And what we'd like to look at is the span and the adoption rate, the challenges, how they evolve for both threats as well as just business operations for adopting cloud, and now a heavy focus on AI in this most recent report. So bear with me. This is going to be my personal perspective of what these findings mean. I'm sure they might evolve as we start to discuss in the working group, which you will be invited to be part of. But I'll share just a few of the findings and kind of my personal take of what they are. First, and this comes from many recent meetings with central banks and global financial service entities around the world, in Europe, in Middle East, in Asia, and here in the United States. And what has been very noticeable over the last few years is we've had this very profound architectural metamorphosis where there's been this lot of change and a transition of a state of reactive cloud adoption to one that is more proactive, looking for automation, autonomy, intelligence native type of operations. Because if you look at just a few years ago, the industry was primarily, and this is going even back to 2020, so the pandemic and a acceleration to move and do a lift and shift from on-prem into cloud, there was a lot of more strategy around the how. How are we going to train up and skill our professionals so that they are competent in the security architecture that is going to be required? How do we understand and move and make resiliency and transparency of the operations possibly being hosted by a third-party service provider? How do we just manage even the basic operational scalability and the efficiency of a multi-cloud environment? Now, I think that has been a lot of change towards we have confidence in the architecture that we're deploying. We are still maturing, but we are along that journey. And now a lot of focus has turned to AI, and specifically agentic AI, and how do we govern autonomous systems that are going to truly benefit this organization long term. We also see a lot of focus on a sovereign native first, having more localized cloud operations and working with hyperscalers and others within a particular country or region, and how do we optimize also to the cloud native features that come with some of these SaaS capabilities. So if we look at the former report that we had in 2023, we see that there's been a real shift in a few things, and other things not so much. It's more consistency. Even in 2023, we saw that 98% of financial service organizations were using some form of cloud capabilities. Now that the percentage of that use has definitely grown in the last 3 years since we've conducted that survey. And one of the points that stood out to me is around multi-cloud. We saw that this increase in the utilization of multi-cloud going from about 57% of respondents 3 years ago to 90% of respondents saying, yes, we do leverage multi-cloud in our environment. That doesn't mean that they all increase that. In fact, we saw that 15 to 20% of those that were using multi-cloud actually reduced the amount of multi-cloud, but they still had some of those capabilities. I do think some of that is being driven by some of the resiliency and the legislation that is like DORA, Digital Operation Resiliency Act out in Europe. I think there are other reasons why people have shifted to a broader use of multi-cloud. A lot of times it's driven by SaaS features and understanding I really want this feature and it works better in this particular cloud. So that's what we heard from some CISOs in the financial service space as to why they may have multi-cloud in their environments. Another thing we saw, and this really, at first it surprised me because the number was so high, but we saw that 61% of financial service respondents said that they already have deployed into production agentic AI. And when you think about it, that probably makes sense. We've seen financial institutions have agents out there communicating with customers, and for several years. In 2024, Wells Fargo, said that they had about 245 million autonomous transactions or engagements with customers, and that was already 2 years ago before we really have the beginning of a mature agent today. So if you're interested in this report, I highly encourage you to join us in the working group that will be formed very shortly to go through all of those results and look to see what is the most eye-popping data comparing it to previous years. Some of the other things, when we look at some of the risk and governance, we are in a highly regulated industry, and that obviously is top of mind for many security professionals, even if they're not part of a GRC team. I think we saw that, to no surprise, cloud misconfigurations and supply chain are still the dominant top threats in our industry. As we conduct our top threats for cloud, no surprise there. Those are also most common recognized threats that they have in that report as well. We see a significant drop, however, in ransomware. So the focus in 2023 was much higher on concerns over ransomware, as well as resiliency, having that transparency and being able to demonstrate, whether it's for regulators or for own self-governance, the ability to see into their third parties' operations or the SaaS product and make sure that they are confident in that security. The top legislation was the EU AI Act. No surprise there. We are currently in phase 2 of that, with the third phase be effective in August of this year, where you see a lot of challenges for people using AI to classify whether it's low, medium, or high risk to use of that particular AI, making sure that there's transparency into the bias, understanding how to report if there is an incident, and other types of elements of those requirements. We also see a skill gap change, where we are going from focus on concern we don't have enough expertise in cloud to we don't have enough expertise in large language models and agents and all these things associated with driving and adopting AI. We also notice that the cloud native tools such as CNAP, CSPM, their use in 2026 has doubled. So we've gone from 10, 15, 20% use in 2023, when they're really starting to get broad awareness and market adoption. And now we see that 35 to 55% of the respondents say, yes, these are the type of tools we have. Obviously, SIEM still is the predominant. I think over 75% of the respondents said that they had SIEM in place, but we're starting to see more of that as well. We also see that frameworks in the governance side, ISO 27001 remains to be the predominant standard. There was still reference to PCI DSS and SOC 2, and of course the Cloud Control Matrix. And just a little plug and a reminder is that you can actually conduct an ISO 27001 and get the benefits of CSA's Cloud Control Matrix by appending that onto one of those reports. So that are some of the early findings. I think from a strategy perspective, we see that there is about 40% of the respondents say they have introduced, since 2023, in the last 3 years, they've introduced an exit strategy for how they could move and shift away from a particular cloud provider. That is probably also brought on by the work and efforts done by FISIC here in the US and some of the regulation in Asia and Europe as well, making sure that there is a clear way to have not just an exit, but good business continuity and contingency. We've seen several of the large hyperscalers have outages, and making sure that that does not disrupt the banking and financial service world. We also see that there is a much greater support by the executive. Over 80% of the respondents in our survey said that yes, they have senior leader and executive support for their cloud and AI initiatives. Predominantly in the cloud area was the question that was focused. And at the same time, there is new cloud barriers. So before, the cloud barriers were around challenges in transparency, not a high confidence in the security and configuration, and lack of technical support on the team. Now it's less about that, and the focus was more on budget and saying that there has been budget cuts, and that has affected some of the cloud adoption, as well as a deprioritization for AI. So some of these things that had been forecast to be cloud projects, they got put on the back burner to meet some of the AI initiatives. And then governance. Also, it's really interesting to see. It seems like there's always these cycles, and with the agents, AI agents now is looking at, okay, we've had an AI policy, but that was more for large language models and more of the reasoning components and that. What we don't have is all of the subtlety of autonomy and tool access and confused deputy and other risks that come with possibly giving agents access to tools or being able to create their own access to tools and other agents. And then just the reality of shadow agents was a constant, not only in the report, but it was written in many times. A lot of fear and concern, and rightfully so. We see that a majority of the banks, I think, another study I saw, there's about 40 to 50% of financial institutions have a license to AI models, yet about 90% of professionals are using AI models in their work. So we see this discrepancy and clearly a lot of shadow AI. There was just a recent breach of a global organization in financial services where they had offices out in Asia that were looking at some financial reconciliation and just put all of the information into a chatbot and thinking that it was a private disclosure, and it ended up being actually an incident that they had to report. So a lot to work with and still build on AI policy and just where we're going to go with agents. That's something that I'm very interested in. If you've heard from our CEO, Jim Rivas, looking at an agentic control plane, all of the various features such as the communication, how do we secure the MCP, ATA, and these protocols, and making sure that if they're not inherent within the protocol, how do we go and put security layers on top of that? And what is that good governance that justifies that use and that inter-agent communication. So quick takeaways for me, I think we are starting, and I'm proud to see it, a very high confidence in cloud strategy and governance and a very low confidence. And I love the honesty in the survey report around AI strategy, having a good strategy and how we identify use cases, the right business cases to explore first, and the transparency and the governance. And then we see this need, and some of it's a movement already, some of it's just an interest in a movement from manual policy to more automated procedures, more autonomy, understanding that the scale of threat is moving very quickly, and we need to have a balance with that in the automation that we start to begin to use more regularly in our security operations itself. One of the last points and data points I'll point is I was really proud to see that almost 50% of the respondents in our survey said that they are using some form of autonomy and automation and AI agents within their SOC already. And I think that is not only justified, but a necessity probably going forward, as long as we're doing it in a secure manner. So with that, again, encourage you to join us to help write this report and see the early data. But until then, please enjoy the rest of the day and the findings from all of your industry peers and colleagues. Thank you for your time.